Hello there and welcome to the video. In this video we will look at a trap against the London system. So this is a trap for black. And I quite like this trap because it's what I would consider an organic trap, meaning that you can play for this trap, see if it happens, without compromising your position. And to illustrate that, I will give you kind of a bonus trap, another well-known trap. So to give you an example of a trap where you kind of compromise your position, we're going to look at after d4, d5, white plays the London system. This move h5 by Erik Rosen. I think Erik Rosen came up with this trap. So this is not our trap, but an example of a non-organic trap in a way. The idea is that if white plays e3, which he often does, d4, d5, bishop f4. If black plays normally, knight f6, white usually goes e3, and he might pre-move e3, and so this might be good for bullet or even blitz games. But I would not recommend such a trap for a longer game, because h5. If white doesn't fall for the trap, let's first show the trap actually. If e3, the idea is e5. And this bishop is actually, believe it or not, it's trapped. If you take on e5, we're going to play f6. If you have taken with a pawn, I'm going to go g5, and the same thing, the bishop is trapped. You can only go here, h4, and no squares. Same thing if you take with the bishop. I'll play f6, and these moves, g5 and h4, will follow. Probably the best white can do is something like this, to grab a pawn and compromise the king, but black is still up a piece. The problem with this trap is that, well, especially in a longer game, you go h5, your opponent might start thinking, I mean, what is this about? And yes, and he doesn't have to come up with any rocket science here. Knight f3 is enough. You're stopping e5 because now you can take with the knight. Your bishop will not be trapped because you haven't blocked it in with e3. And whenever you play the knight here to f6, this one, you've given up the g5 square. Now it's going to be hard to castle kingside, problems with the king. So you've compromised your position, and now your whole game plan has to revolve around this pawn on h5. And you don't have a healthy position. So trap with a decent success rate, but if it doesn't work, you're in some trouble. So what we want to do is to try to take advantage of some London players being too robotic. They play these moves almost no matter what. Knight d2 or bishop d3, then c3 and castle. And this is what we will try to take advantage of, but without really compromising. So we're going to start with playing e6. We can go b6 as well, but I like e6. And we'll go a little bit over some other transpositions, but we're assuming a London player, and you know that he's a London player. Knight f3, we play b6. Of course, you can play e4. We'll look into that later, but we are targeting the London player. We're going to fianchetto. I like fianchettoing first because let's go e3 for white, bishop e7. Going bishop e7 too soon looks a little bit sus. So I think bishop e7 first, and then bishop e7 is not going to alert your opponent as much. But the idea with bishop e7 is to leave this knight on g8, and we'll see the reason why soon. So let's first see if white falls for it. He's going to play the robotic London moves, knight b to d2. Now we're going to go d6, and at the bishop d3, white has fallen for it by playing natural moves. And this is sort of a trigger the yellow pieces. Bishop at d3, by leaving the f1 square, it has left this pawn undefended. And the knight on d2, by being there, it now deprives this knight of a good retreat square on d2. And this all leads to us springing the trap. And the reason we kept this knight on g8, we can now play g5. Supported by the queen and the bishop. So we attack the bishop on f4, and it turns out white is losing material. If he plays well, he's going to lose the exchange. Most likely, and more often than not, I think he will just win a piece here. Either white will realize, okay, g5, he's going to play g4, and he will give up the bishop on f4. Great. He might not realize it, or realize it and play bishop g3. And he might intend to give up the knight on f3. Play something like queen e2 on castle queenside. Because as you can see, the knight doesn't have a square. The pawn takes the e5 square, and the queen and the bishop are lining up against h4. And of course, if the knight moves, then this drops as well. So many people just give up the knight on f3. And you will win a piece. Lovely. You should win the game. The best they can do, and I don't think very often they will find it, is to go knight to g1. Retreat, give up the pawn on g2. We will take it, and now bishop e4. An essential move for white here. He loses the exchange, but he gets some pressure on the long diagonal. We have to play c6 or d5 to not lose the rook. I think d5 is a good move. c6 also comes into consideration. Ideally, you'd like to play queen g7, knight d7, and castle queenside. White is going to win back the pawn on g4, but note that we already won the pawn on g2, so we are up the clean exchange. Note, however, that white does have all the pieces out, and he's ready to get castled. Knight jumping into e4 could be annoying, and queen g7 is something we have to be aware of. So white has some initiative, but we are up the exchange. h5 or knight f6 should be sufficient here, and from here you should be able to handle it. You just have to, avoid some threats, get your pieces out, castle, and enjoy being up the exchange. So that's a trap, and this is the best white can get after he falls for the trap. Let's examine some other options. Let's get the same opening. Remember, we play e6, b6, we fianchetto the bishop, and we play this cheeky bishop to e7. Now, knight d2, d6, and note that white can go c3 here as well. We play knight d7, and this doesn't change anything. If bishop d3 now, again, the robotic London move, we still play g5. And this is even a better version for us because we got the knight out, so we are closer to castling in the critical line. If it goes for something like this, we take and they take. Now probably d5 becomes a better move. And once he takes, we can play knight f6 with tempo, and then try to get our pieces out. Maybe bishop d6, queen e7, and then castle queenside. Something to that effect. So even a better version, because knight d7 is more useful than c3. Okay, but now we are going to look at cases where white actually doesn't fall for it. In that case, we just have to play chess. But the good news is you have a good position and you can play a system. And even for me, I can transpose to the system that I already play. So let's say after d6, they go h3. They are aware of the trap, and they want to give this London square for the bishop. In that case, we can just develop pieces, knight f6, they continue. And I like to play c5 here, take on d4, and play this position. Normal moves. At some point, I will play a6. And this is a position I've played many hundred times online. Solid position with chances for both sides. I like to play queen c6 here, bishop f8. I'm putting pressure on the diagonal and trying to play e5 at some stage. It's a solid, slightly dynamic position, but you're not in any trouble. So if white doesn't fall for it, you can still play chess. But now let's go back to the beginning. So who is this trap for? Well, first of all, if white goes d4 and you don't know anything about him and you play e6, of course you're inviting white to play the French defense. So it would help tremendously if you do play the French defense for black. I play it myself, so that obviously helps. For me, e6, knight f6. Normally against the London, I would have started with knight f6 actually, and I will play something like this. And this would actually transpose to what we looked at, but just a different move order, something like this. I know I can castle or start with this. It doesn't really matter the order of the moves. We arrive at a similar situation. Oops, not queen, but pawn. We arrive at a similar situation that we just had, but a different move order, and then we castle. So this you can play if white doesn't fall for the trap. This can also be good for Dutch players. Let's say b6. Let's say bishop d3 here. And note that, and this should be your trigger, you need bishop d3 and knight d2 for the trap to work. Here there's no knight d2, so the trap doesn't work because the knight has the d2 square. So g5 here will simply not work. The knight can go to d2, and now with g4 hanging, white has too many pieces out, and this is just a good pawn sacrifice for white. What you could do instead is either go for what I did, knight f6, and play for the c5 stuff, very solid, or you can maybe even go for a Dutch and transpose like this to normal positions. So this, starting with e6, b6, can't be. If you start with e6, it's good for French players. If you play Owen's defense, the English, I think it's called the English opening, if you play something like b6 here, c4, b6. So if you don't mind these, you can do this. If you play some Nimzo poker type positions, you will not mind this either, because if white doesn't fall for it, let's say he plays h3 here, you can play similarly to what I did with knight f6, knight d7, and just play solid chess. So I think this is pretty. Yeah, one more thing after b6, of course white can go e4 here, and then you're kind of playing the Owens defense, some sort of bad French. But this is unlikely for the London player. So a good trap, if you know your opponent plays in London, you can still play it and get kind of the openings you want if he doesn't, but be aware that white can go e4 and change things around. So one last look at the trap. We are targeting the robotic London player. Knight f3, b6. We want to fianchetto the bishop, bishop b7. White will play e3. He could play knight b to d2 or c3. It doesn't really matter. e3, bishop e7, and remember, we are keeping this knight on g8. It can't go out yet because we need to cover g5 and h4 later. So knight b to d2, d6. He falls for it, bishop d3, and we play g5. Followed up by g4, and white is in trouble. Simple trap, but beautiful and effective, and I hope it works out for you. So I hope to see you soon. I fortunately have some time now to make videos, so I think I will be making a lot of videos now. Also stocking up for the future, so hope to see you soon. Thanks for watching. Bye bye.